The USS Defiance cut through the darkness of space like a blade through silk, its hull reflecting the distant stars as it moved deeper into unexplored territory. Captain Derek Hayes stood on the bridge with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the view screen display the endless void ahead. The ship had been traveling for 3 months now, mapping systems that no human had ever seen before, and the crew was beginning to feel the weight of isolation that came with deep space exploration. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Morgan sat at the tactical station, her fingers dancing across the controls as she monitored the sensors for any signs of danger or discovery. The bridge was quiet except for the soft hum of the engines and the occasional beep from the navigation console where Ensign Kevin Price plotted their course through the outer Perseus arm. The silence broke when Dr. Helen Carter's voice crackled over the communication system from the science lab 3 decks below. She had detected something unusual, an electromagnetic signal that didn't match any natural phenomenon in their database, and it was repeating in a pattern that suggested intelligence. Derek ordered the ship to change course toward the signal's origin, a yellow star system with 7 planets that appeared unremarkable on their long-range scans. As they drew closer, the signal grew stronger, and Helen confirmed that it was definitely artificial, though the technology behind it seemed primitive compared to human standards. Lieutenant Amy Foster, the ship's first contact specialist, joined Derek on the bridge, her eyes bright with excitement at the prospect of meeting a new alien species. She had studied xenolinguistics for 8 years and had been waiting for a moment like this since she first joined the crew. The Defiance entered orbit around the 4th planet, a world of blue oceans and green continents that reminded Derek of Earth before humanity had spread to the stars. The sensors detected numerous settlements on the surface, but there was something wrong with the readings. Commander Ryan Palmer, the chief engineer, noticed it first from his station near the engine room monitors. The cities below showed signs of basic metallurgy and agriculture, yet scattered across the planet were ruins of buildings that suggested a much more advanced civilization had once existed here. The contrast was jarring, like finding Stone Age villages built among the wreckage of skyscrapers. Derek ordered Amy to prepare a landing team while Lisa swept the orbit for any potential threats. The scans came back clear. No satellites, no defense systems, no signs of any technology more advanced than simple radio transmitters. The shuttle touched down in a clearing near one of the larger settlements, and Amy led her team out into the alien world. The sky was a pale purple and the air smelled of something like cinnamon mixed with rain. The inhabitants appeared within minutes. Tall beings with forearms and skin that shimmered like oil on water. They called themselves the Kelthani, and they greeted the humans with a mixture of fear and wonder that Amy found puzzling. Through careful use of translation devices and universal mathematics, communication was established slowly over the course of several hours. The Kelthani leader, an elderly individual named Orthix, invited the humans to their central gathering place, a circular structure built from carved stone that stood in the shadow of a massive metal spire that clearly predated their current civilization by centuries. Orthix told them a story that made Amy's blood run cold. The Kelthani had not always been primitive. Their ancestors had built cities of glass and metal, had traveled to their moons and begun to dream of the stars. But then the gods had come, beings of immense power who descended from the sky in ships that shone like captured sunlight. These gods, who called themselves the Ascendants, had demonstrated their divine nature by destroying one of the Kelthani cities with weapons that called fire from heaven. The message was clear: worship us, serve us, and live. Resist and die. The Kelthani had no choice but to submit, and the Ascendants had systematically destroyed their technology, their libraries, their universities, anything that might allow them to rise again. Every few generations, the gods returned to collect tribute, food and art and precious metals, and to remind the Kelthani of their place in the cosmic order. Amy listened with growing horror as Orthix showed her ancient monuments scattered throughout the settlement. Each one depicted the same scene, the Ascendants receiving worship from different alien species, dozens of them, each bowing before beings who claimed divinity. According to Kelthani legend, no one had ever successfully defied the gods and survived to tell the tale. The Ascendants were immortal, unstoppable, and utterly without mercy for those who questioned their authority. Amy asked when the gods were expected to return, and Orthix's answer chilled her to the bone. Soon, perhaps within days, the signs in the sky had been observed by the Kelthani priests, and the preparations for tribute were already underway. Back aboard the Defiance, Derek listened to Amy's report with a face carved from stone. Lisa pulled up the data they had collected from orbit, and Helen analyzed the ruins scattered across the planet. The evidence was clear. The Kelthani had been a thriving technological civilization until someone had deliberately broken them, forcing them back into a primitive state to keep them controllable. Ryan examined the ancient spire near the settlement and confirmed that it had once been part of a much larger structure, possibly a spaceport or communications array, now reduced to a monument to lost greatness. The crew looked to Derek for guidance, and he found himself facing a decision that would define not just his career, but possibly humanity's place in this region of space. The debate on the bridge was brief, but intense. Some argued that this was not humanity's fight, that they should document what they found and report back to Earth Command. Others insisted that they couldn't just stand by and watch another species be enslaved by beings who claimed godhood through superior technology. Derek listened to all sides before making his choice. The Defiance would stay, and when these so-called gods arrived, they would find something they had never encountered before, someone who refused to kneel. 3 days later, the sensors detected the arrival of massive vessels at the edge of the system. The ships were unlike anything in human databases, cathedral-like structures of white metal and crystal that seemed to glow with their own internal light. They moved with arrogant slowness toward the Kelthani homeworld, broadcasting their arrival on all frequencies in a message that combined supremacy with expectation of total submission. Derek ordered the Defiance to intercept, and Lisa set a course that would put them directly in the path of the incoming fleet. As the human warship accelerated toward the gods, Derek opened a communication channel and waited for the Ascendants to respond. When the connection established, the view screen filled with the image of a being that looked almost human except for the metallic sheen to its skin and eyes that glowed with an inner blue light. High Ascendant Zephron spoke with a voice that resonated with practiced authority. He expressed amusement at finding another technological species so far from the known centers of civilization, and he offered humanity a choice that he clearly expected them to accept without question: join the Divine Order as servants, share in the glory of the Ascendants by serving their will across the stars, or be destroyed as all heretics must eventually be destroyed. The offer came with a casual certainty that made it clear Zephron had made this speech countless times before, and it had always ended the same way, with submission or extinction. Derek Hayes looked at the being on his screen and felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. He thought about the Kelthani, about the ruins of their civilization, about the dozens of other species depicted in those ancient monuments, all broken and made to bow before false divinity. He thought about humanity's long history of fighting tyranny, of refusing to accept that might made right, of standing up even when the odds seemed impossible. When he spoke, his voice was calm and clear, carrying the weight of not just his own conviction, but the spirit of his entire species. "Absolutely not," Derek said, and with those 2 words he declared war on gods. The Ascendant fleet moved forward with the inevitability of a glacier, their cathedral ships spreading out in a formation designed to inspire awe and terror in equal measure. High Ascendant Zephron's face twisted into something between a smile and a snarl as he processed Derek's refusal, clearly unused to hearing that particular word spoken in response to his divine ultimatum. He raised one hand in a gesture that his crew had seen countless times before, and the lead Ascendant vessel opened fire with weapons that had crushed resistance for 10,000 years. Beams of pure energy lanced across the void, each one capable of boiling oceans or shattering mountains, and they converged on the USS Defiance with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. Lisa Morgan's hands flew across her console as she activated the defensive systems, and the ship's shields flared to life just as the first impact struck home. The bridge shook violently, and sparks erupted from an overhead panel as the energy beams hammered against the Defiance's defensive envelope. Ryan Palmer's voice came over the intercom from engineering, shouting status reports about power distribution and shield integrity, while his team worked frantically to keep the systems operational. Derek gripped the armrests of his command chair and watched the tactical display as more Ascendant ships joined the attack. their weapons creating a web of deadly light around his vessel. The gods were used to their targets cowering or dying, not fighting back, and their attack pattern showed it. They bunched together like predators circling wounded prey, confident in their superiority and eager to witness another civilization's destruction. Lieutenant Jake Morrison sat at the weapons station with sweat beading on his forehead as he calculated firing solutions. The Ascendants had never faced military-grade human weapons, had never experienced the focused brutality of technology designed not to subjugate, but to destroy. Jake locked onto the nearest Ascendant vessel and fired the main railgun, and the weapon spoke with a voice like thunder. A tungsten rod the size of a telephone pole accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed and crossed the distance between ships in less than a heartbeat. The projectile hit the Ascendant Cathedral ship dead center, punching through its hull like paper and creating a cascade of secondary explosions as it tore through decks and systems that had never been designed to withstand such kinetic fury. The Ascendant ship broke apart in silence, its atmosphere venting into space in great frozen plumes while debris scattered across thousands of kilometers. Inside that dying vessel, one of the immortal gods screamed as fire consumed metal and flesh alike, and then there was nothing but wreckage tumbling through the void. High Ascendant Zephron watched his sibling die, watched the divine flesh burn and the eternal spirit extinguish, and for the first time in his 3,000 years of existence, he felt something he had not experienced since ascending to godhood. Fear. The Defiance rolled to avoid another volley of energy beams, and Lisa plotted a course through the asteroid field that ringed the inner system. Derek approved her plan immediately, recognizing that they needed cover in space to maneuver against the superior numbers arrayed against them. The human warship accelerated hard, its engines pushing limits that made Ryan nervous as he monitored the reactor temperatures from his station. The Ascendants followed, firing continuously, their weapons scoring hit after hit against the Defiance's shields. The defensive systems held, but warning lights were beginning to appear across every console on the bridge, indicators of damage accumulating faster than repair crews could address it. Dr. Helen Carter worked in the science lab while the ship shook around her, analyzing data captured from the Ascendant vessels during the brief engagement. Her training kept her focused despite the chaos, and what she found made her heart race with excitement and vindication. The Ascendants were advanced, certainly, but their technology was not divine. She found evidence of conventional power systems, standard shield generators, weapons platforms that operated on principles humanity understood quite well. More importantly, she found signs of stagnation in their designs, engineering choices that prioritized appearance over function, systems that had not been updated or improved in centuries. The gods had stopped innovating because gods did not need to improve. They were already perfect by definition. Helen rushed to the bridge and shared her findings with Derek while the ship weaved between asteroids the size of mountains. The captain listened intently as she explained that the Ascendants were not unstoppable. They were simply bullies who had never encountered real resistance. Their ships were built to impress and terrify, not to fight against peers. Their weapons were designed to destroy primitives from orbit, not engage in actual ship-to-ship combat. Most damning of all, their formations and tactics showed no evidence of ever having faced an enemy that could shoot back effectively. Derek smiled grimly as he processed this information, already forming a plan that would turn the Ascendants' arrogance against them. Amy Foster took Helen's data and began broadcasting it on all frequencies in every language the Defiance's computers could translate. The message was simple but devastating. The gods can die, the gods can bleed, the gods are not divine. Across the Kelthani homeworld below, the population watched their view screens in shock as the human ship fought beings they had been taught to worship without question. In cities and villages, in hidden places where old technical manuals had been preserved in defiance of Ascendant law, something stirred in the hearts of the Kelthani. It was small at first, fragile as a candle flame in a storm, but it grew stronger with every second the Defiance remained alive. Hope, humanity called it, and it was more dangerous to tyrants than any weapon. High Ascendant Zephron realized his mistake too late. In his eagerness to crush the human heresy quickly and publicly, he had ordered his entire fleet to converge on the Defiance. 30 cathedral ships, the bulk of his regional force, now clustered together in a formation that prioritized surrounding the enemy over tactical spacing. They were packed tight, overlapping their shield envelopes, each captain jockeying for position to land the killing blow that would restore the divine order. It was the formation of gods executing a ritual punishment, not soldiers fighting a war. And Derek Hayes recognized it for exactly what it was, an opportunity. The captain gave orders quickly and clearly. Ryan diverted all available power to weapons and engines, accepting that shields would have to hold with what they had. Lisa calculated a vector that would take them straight down and away from the ascendant formation, opening the distance needed for what came next. Jake Morrison armed every nuclear warhead in the Defiance's arsenal. 23 thermonuclear devices ranging from tactical yields to city killers, each one a concentrated piece of humanity's long history with weapons of mass destruction. The Ascendants had energy beams and graviton missiles, impressive technologies that looked beautiful and terrible as they crossed space. Humanity had nuclear fire, crude perhaps by comparison, but effective in ways that transcended elegance. Derek watched the tactical display as the last pieces fell into place. The Ascendants were still firing, still pursuing, still confident that their numbers and their divine status would inevitably lead to victory. They did not understand that they were no longer hunting prey. They had become the targets. The captain took a deep breath, thought briefly about the chain of decisions that had led to this moment, and then gave the order that would change the balance of power in this entire region of space. "Fire everything," he said. And Jake Morrison's fingers moved across his console like a concert pianist reaching a crescendo. The missiles launched in a single devastating salvo, streaking away from the Defiance toward the clustered Ascendant fleet. The gods saw them coming and attempted to shoot them down, their point defense systems tracking and destroying the incoming warheads with admirable efficiency. They stopped 15 of the missiles, then 18, then 20. 3 nuclear warheads slipped through the defensive fire and detonated in the heart of the Ascendant formation, and space itself seemed to scream. The thermonuclear explosions created spheres of plasma hotter than the surface of stars, expanding outward at speeds that gave the gods no time to react or retreat. Cathedral ships caught in the blast radius simply ceased to exist, vaporized instantly. Others farther from the detonation points had their shields overloaded and their hulls scorched black. The electromagnetic pulse from the detonation scrambled sensors and communications across the entire battle space. When the light faded and the radiation cleared enough for sensors to function again, High Ascendant Zephyron looked at the tactical display and felt his divine certainty crumble. Of his 30 cathedral ships, only 8 remained functional. The others were debris or burning wrecks, their crews dead or dying, their divine passengers discovering that immortality was a pleasant myth that did not survive direct exposure to nuclear fire. The High Ascendant's own flagship was damaged, its port side blackened and several decks exposed to vacuum. Around him, his surviving siblings were screaming in panic and pain, begging him for orders, asking him how this could happen to gods. Zephyron had no answer for them because the truth was too terrible to speak aloud. They were not gods, they had never been gods, they were simply... The silence after battle felt heavier than the combat itself, broken only by the steady stream of damage reports flooding into the bridge from every section of the ship. Derek listened to his crew catalog the injuries the Defiance had sustained, while keeping his eyes fixed on the view screen, where the retreating Ascendant vessels were rapidly disappearing from sensor range. Ryan Palmer reported that the main reactor was stable, but operating at 70% efficiency. 3 of the shield generators were completely burned out, and the starboard weapons array needed extensive repairs before it could fire again. Lisa Morgan added that they had expended most of their missile inventory, and the railgun needed maintenance after firing at maximum capacity during the engagement. The ship could still fight if necessary, but it would be a significantly shorter fight than the last one. Dr. Helen Carter requested permission to board one of the drifting Ascendant wrecks, arguing that they needed to understand their enemy's technology better if they wanted to survive future encounters. Derek approved the salvage mission with the condition that security teams would accompany the science personnel, and that everyone would work quickly. The gods might have fled, but there was no guarantee they would not return with reinforcements, and the Defiance needed every advantage it could gather before that happened. Lieutenant Kevin Price volunteered to pilot the shuttle, and within an hour, a mixed team of scientists and security personnel were cutting their way into the hull of a cathedral ship that had been torn nearly in half by the nuclear detonations. Down on the Kelthani homeworld, The population was experiencing something they had not felt in generations: the absence of certainty about their place in the cosmic order. Amy Foster stood in the central gathering place surrounded by hundreds of Kelthani, who all wanted to know what had just happened in orbit above their heads. Orthix translated for her as she explained in simple terms that the beings they called gods were simply another species with advanced technology, no different in fundamental ways from humans or Kelthani. The crowd responded with a mixture of disbelief, joy, fear, and anger that came from having their entire worldview shattered in a single afternoon. Some wanted to tear down the monuments to the ascendants immediately, while others feared divine retribution for such sacrilege. Amy did her best to help them understand that freedom came with responsibilities and choices that would not always be easy or clear. Aboard the wrecked ascendant vessel, Helen's team made discoveries that both excited and disturbed them. The ship's interior was designed more like a temple than a military craft, with vast chambers dedicated to storing tribute from subject species and living quarters that prioritized luxury over efficiency. The technology was impressive in places, particularly the energy generation systems and the artificial gravity that still functioned in sections where power remained. But Helen also found evidence of deliberate design choices that valued appearance over practicality. Shield generators that glowed with unnecessary light, control interfaces covered in decorative symbols that made them harder to use, weapons systems that had not been updated or improved in what looked like centuries. The gods had built their ships to look divine rather than to fight wars, and that choice had cost them dearly. The most significant find came when Helen accessed what appeared to be the ship's central database. The information inside painted a picture of an empire built entirely on lies and maintained through strategic genocide. The Ascendants had been exploring space for 12,000 years, and in that time they had encountered hundreds of developing civilizations. Any species that showed signs of approaching the technological level needed for spaceflight was either enslaved and deliberately kept primitive like the Kelthani, or exterminated entirely if they resisted too effectively. Helen found records of 43 species that had been completely destroyed, their worlds sterilized from orbit, their entire existence erased except for entries in the Ascendant archives. The casual nature of these records, the bureaucratic language used to describe genocide, made Helen feel sick as she copied the data to portable storage. Back on the Defiance, Derek received a priority transmission from Earth Command that had been traveling through space for months and had just reached their position. Admiral Patricia Collins appeared on the view screen, her gray hair and weathered face familiar to Derek from his academy days when she had been his tactical instructor. Patricia's message was recorded, of course. The distance between Earth and their current position made real-time communication impossible. She congratulated Derek on making first contact with a new species and reminded him to follow proper protocols for engagement with potentially hostile aliens. The message had been sent before the battle, before anyone on Earth knew about the Ascendants or their empire, and Derek felt a cold weight settle in his stomach as he realized how isolated the Defiance truly was. Lisa Morgan worked with Kevin Price to establish a defensive perimeter around the Kelthani system, using the remaining sensor buoys and passive detection systems to give them early warning if the Ascendants returned. She plotted fallback positions and calculated how long the Defiance could hold against various force compositions, each scenario grimmer than the last. The math was simple and brutal. If the gods came back with sufficient numbers, the human warship would die fighting. Jake Morrison began training Kelthani volunteers in basic defensive tactics, teaching them how to operate simple weapons and organize resistance cells. The aliens learned quickly. Their hands adapted well to human firearms, and their natural caution made them attentive students. Jake found himself respecting their determination, even as he worried about how little time they had to prepare. Amy Foster helped the Kelthani establish a provisional government, something they had never needed before, because the Ascendants had ruled every aspect of their lives through appointed priests and fear. The process was messy and filled with arguments about who should lead and how decisions should be made. Democracy was a foreign concept to beings who had only known tyranny, and Amy found herself explaining basic principles of representation and voting rights over and over again. She saw frustration in Orthix's eyes sometimes, a longing for the simplicity of the old ways when someone else made all the difficult choices, but she also saw determination growing stronger each day, a recognition that freedom meant taking responsibility for their own future. Ryan Palmer's engineering teams worked around the clock to repair the Defiance's damage, but they were limited by available supplies and the scope of the destruction. 3 shield generators could be rebuilt, but it would take weeks, and the starboard weapons array needed components that simply were not available outside of a proper shipyard. Ryan did what he could with what he had, prioritizing systems that would keep them alive in another fight. He pushed his people hard but not past their breaking point, knowing that exhausted engineers made mistakes that could kill everyone aboard. The work progressed steadily, and each repaired system felt like a small victory against the universe's tendency toward entropy. Helen brought her findings to Derek in his ready room late one evening while the ship operated on skeleton crew for the night shift. She showed him the evidence of ascendant genocide, the records of species destroyed simply for reaching toward the stars. Derek listened in silence as she explained that the empire they had bloodied was built on the graves of countless civilizations that had never had a chance to defend themselves. The captain felt anger burning cold in his chest as he processed what Helen was telling him. This was not just about protecting the Kelthani anymore. It was about justice for species that no longer existed to seek it for themselves. The decision to send a message to Earth Command weighed heavily on Derek's mind. He could report what they had found and request immediate reinforcements, but that message would take months to reach Earth and months more for any fleet to arrive. In the meantime, the Defiance and the species they had sworn to protect would be alone against an empire that spanned hundreds of worlds. He could also choose to withdraw, to retreat to human space with the data they had collected and let Earth Command decide how to proceed. But that would mean abandoning the Kelthani to almost certain retaliation, and Derek found he could not make that choice. Lisa entered the ready room without knocking, something she only did when the situation demanded immediate attention. Her face was pale as she reported that long-range sensors had detected multiple faster-than-light signatures at the edge of the system. The Ascendants were returning and they were bringing friends. Derek felt his stomach tighten as Lisa brought up the tactical display showing at least 30 cathedral ships approaching, possibly more still outside sensor range. The captain looked at the numbers, looked at his officers, and made the only choice that his conscience would allow. They would fight. They would make the gods pay dearly for every meter of space, and they would show the subjugated species of this region that resistance was possible. Derek returned to the bridge and began issuing orders to prepare for battle. Ryan pushed the reactor to maximum output. Lisa armed every weapon system they had left. Jake readied the remaining missiles for deployment. The crew of the Defiance looked at their captain and saw not fear be. The Ascendant Armada moved through space with the weight of inevitability. Nearly 200 cathedral ships arranged in formations that had not been needed in living memory. High Ascendant Zephron had called in favors and invoked ancient pacts, assembling a force large enough to crush entire civilizations. He broadcast his intentions across every frequency, ensuring that all the subjugated species would witness what happened to those who defied the gods. The message was simple and brutal. Rebellion would be met with absolute destruction, and the human heretics would burn as an example to anyone foolish enough to question divine authority. Derek Hayes stood on the bridge of the Defiance and watched the massive fleet approach, knowing with cold certainty that his ship could not win this fight through conventional means. Ryan Palmer appeared on the bridge view screen from engineering, his face drawn with exhaustion but his eyes sharp with desperate inspiration. He had a plan, he told Derek, something insane and dangerous that might give them a chance against impossible odds. The system's star was approaching a period of maximum magnetic activity, building toward solar storms that would normally pose navigation hazards for any ship traveling too close. Ryan believed they could weaponize that activity, use precisely placed graviton detonations to trigger a coronal mass ejection aimed directly at the Ascendant fleet. The result would be a wave of superheated plasma and electromagnetic radiation, traveling at millions of miles per hour, deadly to any ship caught in its path. The catch was that the Defiance would need to position itself dangerously close to the star to make the calculations, and they would need Ascendant graviton weapons to trigger the effect, since human technology did not include that particular type of device. Dr. Helen Carter refined the plan from her lab, using data captured from the salvaged Ascendant vessels to map the star's magnetic field lines, with precision their enemy had never needed. She calculated that they would need at least 30 intact graviton missiles to create the chain reaction necessary for the coronal mass ejection. Lisa Morgan immediately saw the problem. The only place to get Ascendant graviton missiles was from Ascendant ships, which meant boarding one of the damaged vessels still drifting at the system's edge and extracting the warheads before the main fleet arrived. Derek approved the mission despite its risks, knowing they had no other options that did not end with the Defiance becoming a debris field. Lisa led the boarding team personally, taking 2 shuttles and 20 crew members armed with everything they could carry. The target was a cathedral ship that had lost main power but whose weapons bays appeared intact based on external scans. They docked with the dead vessel and cut their way inside, moving through corridors that still held traces of atmosphere and the frozen bodies of Ascendants who had died when life support failed. The ship's interior was a maze of ceremonial chambers and decorative passages that made navigation difficult, but Lisa kept her team focused on reaching the weapons storage. They found automated defenses still active in some sections, turrets that tracked movement and fired energy bolts at anything that crossed their sensors. 2 crew members were injured, and Ensign Kevin Price had to use a plasma cutter to disable a security door that refused to acknowledge their override codes. The weapons bay was vast and dimly lit, containing rows of graviton missiles mounted on racks that ran the length of a chamber, larger than the Defiance's entire cargo hold. Lisa's team worked quickly to detach the warheads from their delivery systems, using cutting tools and sheer determination to free the devices from mountings designed to last centuries. They managed to secure 32 intact warheads before sensors detected the Ascendant fleet entering the outer system. The team raced back to their shuttles with their dangerous cargo, leaving the dead ship behind as they burned hard toward the Defiance. During the extraction, they had also downloaded data from the weapons bay computer, information that Helen would later examine with growing horror. Back aboard the Defiance, Helen reviewed the recovered data while Ryan's team carefully stored the captured graviton warheads in the ship's armory. What she found made her hands shake as she compiled the report for Derek. The files contained detailed records of every civilization the Ascendants had destroyed over the past 3,000 years, complete with tactical assessments and recommendations for genocide efficiency. Species that developed radio communication were monitored closely, and any that showed signs of approaching spaceflight capability were targeted for elimination. The Ascendants had refined their extermination protocols to an art form, using overwhelming orbital bombardment to sterilize entire planets, while broadcasting the destruction to neighboring systems as a warning. 43 species had been completely erased, their cultures and histories reduced to footnotes in Ascendant databases. Derek took the evidence and made a decision that went beyond survival or tactics. He ordered Amy Foster to broadcast the genocide records on all frequencies, ensuring that every subjugated species in the region could see exactly what their gods had done. The transmission went out in hundreds of languages, showing the truth about the divine order and the price paid by those who dared to reach for the stars. Across 24 worlds, populations watched their screens in shock and rage, as the lies they had been told for generations crumbled under the weight of documented atrocities. On the Kelthani homeworld, the monuments to the Ascendants finally fell as crowds tore them down with their bare hands. The gods had claimed to be benevolent rulers, but the evidence showed they were nothing more than genocidal tyrants afraid of competition. Ascendant Zephron watched the broadcast spread through his empire and felt control slipping through his fingers like water. He accelerated his fleet toward the Kelthani system, determined to crush the source of this heresy before it could spread further. The cathedral ships moved into attack formation, clustering together as they had always done when executing judgments against primitives. Zephron's tactical officers advised spreading out, maintaining proper spacing between vessels, but the High Ascendant refused to change tactics that had served the Empire for millennia. The gods would descend upon the heretics as one divine force, overwhelming and unstoppable, just as they always had. The Defiance moved toward the inner system with the captured graviton warheads carefully deployed in a pattern that Ryan and Helen had calculated down to the meter. Derek pushed the ship closer to the star than any human vessel had ever ventured, the hull temperature climbing steadily as they entered the corona's outer reaches. Lisa monitored the Ascendant fleet's approach, watching as nearly 200 cathedral ships entered the system in a formation that placed them directly in the path of what was coming. Jake Morrison stood ready at the weapons console, his hand hovering over the detonation controls that would trigger the graviton warheads in the precisely timed sequence needed for the plan to work. The stellar surface churned beneath them, magnetic field lines twisting and reconnecting in patterns that Helen tracked with growing anticipation. The star was ready, balanced on the edge of a massive ejection event that needed only the right trigger to unleash apocalyptic force. Derek gave the order and Jake activated the graviton warheads in sequence, each detonation sending ripples through the star's magnetic field. The effect cascaded faster than anyone had predicted, magnetic reconnection events triggering more reconnection events in an exponential chain reaction. The stellar surface erupted in a fountain of superheated plasma that reached out like the hand of an angry god. The coronal mass ejection exploded from the star with the force of 10 billion nuclear weapons, a wall of matter and energy that turned space itself into a furnace. The Defiance was already accelerating away at maximum thrust, Ryan pushing the engines past every safety limit as the ship raced ahead of the expanding plasma wave. Behind them, the Ascendant fleet finally realized the danger they were in, but their clustered formation left no room for evasive maneuvers. Cathedral ships collided with each other as captains attempted desperate course changes, shields overlapping and interfering, confusion spreading through the Divine Armada like a plague. High Ascendant Zephron screamed orders that no one could hear over the communications chaos, watching his tactical display dissolve into static as the electromagnetic pulse from the stellar event scrambled every sensor in the fleet. The plasma wave hit the forward elements of his armada with the inevitability of nightfall, and ships that had existed for thousands of years simply ceased to exist. Shields designed to deflect energy weapons vaporized instantly against the raw power of stellar matter moving at relativistic speeds. Hulls that had never known damage melted like wax in a furnace. The cathedral ships died beautiful deaths, their crystalline structures shattering into clouds of glowing fragments that briefly outshone the stars around them. Zephron's flagship caught the edge of the plasma wave and tumbled end over end, half its hull scorched black and trailing atmosphere from 100 breaches. The High Ascendant found himself pinned against a bulkhead by acceleration forces his ship's systems could no longer compensate for, watching through a cracked view screen as his empire died. He tried to pray but found he no longer remembered who gods prayed to in their final moments. 3 months passed like a long breath finally released, and the Kelthani system transformed from a prison into something that resembled hope. The USS Defiance remained in orbit, its hull still bearing the scars of battle despite Ryan Palmer's tireless work to keep the vessel operational. The chief engineer had performed miracles with limited resources, but he was honest with Derek about the ship's condition. They could limp to the nearest human outpost if absolutely necessary, but any serious combat would likely be their last. The crew had settled into a routine of repairs and assistance to the surface, helping the Kelthani rebuild their civilization while waiting for reinforcements that might never come. Admiral Patricia Collins arrived with the Third Fleet on a Tuesday morning. 6 massive battlecruisers and a dozen support vessels dropping out of faster-than-light travel at the system's edge. Derek felt relief wash over him as he watched the fleet approach, finally allowing himself to acknowledge how much weight he had been carrying for the past months. Patricia's face appeared on the view screen, older than he remembered but with the same sharp eyes that had evaluated his academy performance years ago. She congratulated him on keeping his crew alive against impossible odds, and informed him that Earth Command had designated the Kelthani system as a priority diplomatic zone. Humanity was officially entering the complicated business of galactic politics, and Derek Hayes had kicked down the door in the most dramatic way imaginable. The liberated species had not been idle during the months of waiting. The Kelthani had reached out to other worlds that had suffered under Ascendant rule, and together they had formed something they called the Coalition of Independent Worlds. Amy Foster found herself appointed as Earth's official ambassador to the Coalition, a position she had never trained for, but accepted with characteristic determination. She spent her days helping former slaves figure out how to govern themselves, mediating disputes between species with vastly different cultures and needs, and explaining to increasingly frustrated alien leaders that democracy was supposed to be messy and difficult. The Coalition encompassed over 300 inhabited systems, each one declaring independence as news of the Ascendant. Defeat spread across the region. Dr. Helen Carter presented her comprehensive findings to Admiral Collins in a briefing that lasted 4 hours and left the Admiral looking physically ill. The evidence of systematic genocide, The casual cruelty of a civilization that had erased 43 species simply for developing technology, the thousands of years of deliberate oppression designed to keep entire populations helpless and afraid. Patricia listened to it all and then asked the question that mattered most. How many ascendants remained? Helen estimated that perhaps 10,000 individuals survived, scattered across the remnants of their empire, many of them already captured by vengeful populations who remembered every crime. Some had fled to the Galactic Rim, running as far and fast as their damaged ships could carry them. None still claimed divinity. The Coalition's first official act as a unified body was to request something specific from humanity. They wanted help rebuilding their civilizations, wanted access to technology and education that had been denied to them for generations, wanted to learn how to defend themselves against future tyrants. But they did not want humanity to rule them, did not want to trade one set of gods for another. They wanted partnership, not patronage, and they wanted to earn their place among the stars rather than have it gifted to them. Derek supported this approach strongly when Patricia asked for his opinion, arguing that humanity's strength should be used to lift others up, rather than hold them down. The Admiral agreed, and Earth Command began drawing up plans for a long-term support program that respected Coalition sovereignty. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Morgan received orders promoting her to captain and giving her command of a new exploration vessel being built in Earth's orbital yards. The promotion came with Admiral Collins's personal recommendation and a mission briefing that made Lisa smile with anticipation. She would lead expeditions into unexplored regions, searching for other civilizations that might need assistance or just making first contact with species humanity had never encountered. Jake Morrison accepted a position as tactical instructor, teaching Coalition defense forces how to protect themselves without becoming the next generation of tyrants. He found the work satisfying in ways that pure combat had never been, watching former victims learn to stand tall and defend their own freedom. Ryan Palmer returned to Earth with a head full of ideas about next-generation warship design, already planning vessels that could respond faster to threats like the Ascendants. He testified before military committees and engineering boards, explaining how the Defiance had survived through a combination of solid construction and desperate improvisation. His recommendations would influence human ship design for decades, prioritizing durability and adaptability over raw firepower. Dr. Helen Carter chose to remain with the Coalition as chief scientific advisor, helping them rebuild the knowledge that the Ascendants had systematically destroyed. She established research centers on a dozen worlds, training a new generation of scientists who would push the boundaries of what their species could achieve. Amy Foster stayed on the Kelthani homeworld and watched with pride as Orthix was elected to lead the planetary government in the Coalition's first democratic election. The old alien had been reluctant to run, arguing that leadership should go to someone younger and more knowledgeable, but the population had insisted on choosing someone who remembered what freedom cost. Amy sent regular reports back to Earth, documenting the Coalition's progress and the inevitable mistakes that came with learning self-governance. She wrote about trade disputes and cultural misunderstandings, about the slow process of healing from millennia of trauma, about the amazing resilience of species finally given the chance to determine their own destiny. Captain Derek Hayes stood on the bridge of his new command, a vessel christened the USS Revelation in honor of the truth his crew had helped reveal. The ship was larger than the Defiance, better armed and more advanced in every way, designed specifically for long-range exploration in potentially hostile territory. Admiral Collins had given him a mission that combined diplomacy with the threat of force, find other civilizations like the Ascendants, and teach them the same lesson. The galaxy was vast and humanity had only explored a tiny fraction of it, but Patricia's intelligence suggested there were other species out there who had chosen to rule through fear rather than cooperation. Derek's orders were clear. Offer them a chance to change peacefully, but be prepared to demonstrate what happened to false gods who refused. The crew of the Revelation was drawn from volunteers across the fleet, men and women who had heard the story of the Defiance and wanted to be part of something larger than themselves. They came from different backgrounds and brought different skills, but they shared a common belief that freedom was worth fighting for, and that tyranny should be opposed wherever it appeared. Derek looked at their faces during the first crew briefing, and saw the same determination he had felt when he told High Ascendant Zephyron that humanity would not kneel. These were people who understood that the universe did not automatically bend toward justice. The good outcomes required brave people willing to stand against darkness. The Revelation's departure was marked by a ceremony attended by representatives from 24 coalition species. Orthix gave a speech thanking humanity for breaking the chains that had bound their people for millennia, while carefully noting that true freedom meant taking responsibility for both successes and failures. The old Kelthani had learned well, understanding that gratitude should not become dependence. Amy stood beside Orthix and watched the human warship prepare to leave, feeling both pride in what they had accomplished and anxiety about challenges yet to come. The coalition was still fragile, still learning, still vulnerable to internal conflicts and external threats. But it existed, and that was more than anyone had dared hope for just months ago. Derek recorded his first captain's log entry as the Revelation cleared the Kelthani system and prepared to jump to faster-than-light speeds. He spoke about the responsibility that came with power, about the difference between ruling through fear and leading through inspiration, about humanity's obligation to help others while respecting their right to choose their own path. He mentioned the Ascendants and what they had represented, a cautionary tale about what happened when a civilization stopped growing and started stagnating. Most importantly, he talked about the future and the promise that humanity would carry into the unknown reaches of space. The universe was vast and full of wonders and dangers that humans had only begun to understand. There would be other tyrants out there, other species claiming divinity and crushing anyone who questioned their authority. There would be challenges that could not be solved with weapons alone, problems that required wisdom and patience rather than force. But Derek felt confident that humanity was ready for whatever came next. Not because humans were superior to other species, but because they understood something fundamental about existence. Gods were made up by people who wanted easy answers to hard questions, and immortality was a myth told by those